The imperial autumn hunt always smelled the same. Crushed grass beneath horses' hooves, damp earth warmed by the sun, and the faint, coppery tang of blood drifting through the forest like a held breath. To most, it was a celebration. To Princess Shen Lianhua of Wu, it felt like standing at the edge of a memory she had already lived once before. She sat straight-backed on her mare, reins loose in her gloved hands, her posture as composed as the jade hairpin anchoring her dark hair. Around her, banners snapped in the wind, embroidered dragons curling against fields of crimson silk. Courtiers laughed too loudly. Young nobles whispered, their eyes sliding toward the high platform where the imperial family waited. And Lianhua waited too. She told herself she was calm. She told herself this hunt meant nothing. That the past life she remembered so vividly had already ended in ash and regret, and that whatever happened today could no longer hurt her. It was a lie, and she knew it. Across the clearing, Crown Prince Zhao Yichen dismounted with practiced grace. He wore hunting leathers instead of ceremonial robes, dark and unadorned, but he still looked every inch the heir to the empire. Taller than most, shoulders broad, expression restrained to the point of coldness. When he laughed with his companions, it never reached his eyes. Lianhua's fingers tightened around the reins despite herself. In their past life, she had loved that restraint. She had mistaken it for steadiness. For depth. She should have known better. A horn sounded. The hunt was over. Servants rushed forward, collecting weapons, guiding horses away. The prize of the day was already known. The ceremonial goose, white-feathered and pristine, its neck bound with red silk. It symbolized fidelity, unity, a promise before heaven and earth. In the empire's long traditions, a prince gifting the goose to a noblewoman was not a casual gesture. It was a declaration. In her last life, Yichen had placed that goose in her arms with hands that trembled slightly. He had looked at her then, really looked at her, and sworn they would rule together. This time, he did not look at her at all. Lianhua noticed the shift before anyone else did. The way the court's murmurs thinned, then sharpened. The way the Grand Chamberlain hesitated before announcing the presentation. The way Yichen's gaze slid, almost unwillingly, past her, and settled elsewhere. Her chest went cold. The Chamberlain's voice rang out. By His Imperial Highness's decree, the ceremonial goose is bestowed upon Lady. The paw stretched. Lianhua felt it like a blade drawn slowly across her skin. Lady Su Meiyin. For a heartbeat, the world simply stopped. Lianhua heard nothing. Not the wind. Not the murmurs. Not even her own breath. She watched as Zhao Yichen accepted the goose from the servant, his movements precise, distant, as if he were completing a task long decided. He turned. Lady Su Meiyin stood 3 places to Lianhua's left. She was dressed in pale peach, her figure slender, her expression carefully composed but failing at the edges. Her eyes were wide, shimmering with disbelief and something like triumph struggling to surface. When Yichen placed the goose into her arms, Meiyin gasped softly. Her hands shook as she accepted it, fingers brushing his sleeve for just a moment too long. The court erupted. Whispers crashed over one another, disbelief giving way to excited speculation. Lianhua felt dozens of gazes snap toward her, sharp and hungry, waiting to see how the Princess of Wu would react. She did not move. Inside her chest, something old and heavy finally settled into place. So. He remembered too. Not just fragments. Not just dreams or unease. He remembered the end. She saw it then, clearly. The faint tension in his jaw. The way he had avoided her eyes since the hunt began. The careful distance he had kept, as if afraid that one wrong glance would drag him back into a life he had sworn never to repeat. In their past life, on his deathbed, he had looked at her with fear instead of love. If there is another life, he had whispered, voice ragged, I hope. I never meet you again. Lianhua had held his hand until it went cold anyway. Now, Reborn, he had chosen first. A servant cleared his throat. Princess Shen. The reminder jolted her back into her body. Her mare shifted beneath her, sensing the tension. Lianhua inhaled slowly, deeply. She felt the eyes on her, the expectation that she would be humiliated, furious, heartbroken. She dismounted. The movement was unhurried, graceful. When her boots touched the ground, the noise of the court seemed to dull, as if the world itself leaned closer. She stepped forward, skirts whispering over the grass, and bowed. Not deeply. Not submissively. Just enough. Your Imperial Highness, she said, her voice clear and even. She lifted her gaze to meet Zhao Yichen's at last. For a fraction of a second, his composure cracked. She saw it. The flash of something raw. Guilt, perhaps. Or fear. Or the echo of a woman standing before him in blood-stained robes, calculating how many lives had to be sacrificed to hold an empire together. Then it was gone. Princess Shen, he replied. Lianhua straightened and turned slightly, angling herself so her voice carried to the watching court. It seems I misjudged your intentions, she said calmly. The ceremonial goose is not a trifling gift. To give it lightly would be an insult to heaven. A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. Meiyin's fingers tightened around the goose's silk binding. Lianhua smiled. It was not a warm smile. Fortunately, she continued, you have spared me that insult. Zhao Yichen's brows drew together. Princess. She raised a hand, stopping him. The gesture was small, but it carried authority. The authority of someone who had once commanded armies and sentenced ministers to death without raising her voice. You have chosen Lady Su, Lianhua said. A gentle, thoughtful woman. Well suited to you. Meiyin flushed, uncertain whether she was being praised or dissected. Lianhua turned fully toward her and inclined her head. Congratulations, Lady Su. May your union be harmonious. The court held its breath. Then Lianhua turned back to Zhao Yichen, and her eyes hardened. As for you, Your Highness, she said, her tone sharpening just slightly, indecision is the gravest flaw a ruler can possess. To hesitate is to invite chaos. A murmur spread like wildfire. If you can abandon one promise so easily, she went on, how can the realm trust you to uphold greater ones? Zhao Yichen's face went pale. Lianhua felt something loosen inside her chest. Not relief. Not joy. Closure. I, Shen Lianhua of Wu, she said, loud enough for all to hear, formally withdraw from any future consideration of marriage with His Imperial Highness. I have no interest in standing beside a man who fears the consequences of his own choices. Silence crashed down. Then, somewhere in the distance, a bird took flight. Lianhua bowed once more, this time to the Emperor and Empress on the platform. This hunt has been enlightening. Without waiting for permission, she turned and walked away. She did not look back. Behind her, Zhao Yichen stood frozen, the weight of 2 lifetimes pressing down on his spine, as the woman he had once loved, once feared, once wished away, finally chose herself instead. And for the first time since his rebirth, he wondered if he had made the gravest mistake of all. The decree came 3 days later. It was delivered at dawn, carried by a eunuch whose voice trembled despite years of training. Lady Su Meiyin was to be named Crown Princess. The wedding preparations would begin immediately. Auspicious dates were already being consulted. The Empire, it seemed, had accepted the decision faster than anyone expected. Shen Lianhua heard the news from her own maid while she was still half-dressed, her hair loose down her back, the window open to the pale morning mist. She didn't react at first. The maid lingered, waiting for outrage, grief, some sign that her princess was still made of flesh and blood instead of stone. When none came, she quietly finished fastening Lianhua's sleeves and retreated. Lianhua sat alone for a long time. In her previous life, this was how it had started too. Not with betrayal. Not with Celia. With silence. With the slow realization that the man beside her no longer met her eyes unless he had to. She rose and closed the window. The capital was waking. Bells rang from distant temples. Somewhere, carpenters were already working on wedding pavilions. Red silk would soon drape the streets. She told herself she didn't care. But memory was a patient thing. That afternoon, the imperial summons arrived. Crown Princess Su Meiyin wished for an audience. Lianhua almost laughed. Of course she did. The meeting was arranged in a side pavilion near the Lotus Lake, far from the main halls. It was meant to appear informal, an exchange between women rather than a political confrontation. The air smelled of damp leaves and late-blooming flowers. Koi stirred beneath the water's surface, slow and heavy. Meiyin arrived first. She wore white this time, not peach. Her hair was pinned simply, pearls at her ears. Anyone looking at her would see a woman overwhelmed by sudden fortune, trying her best to appear worthy of it. Lianhua saw the tension in her shoulders. the way her fingers kept tightening in her sleeves. They exchanged bows. Princess Shen Meiyin said softly. Thank you for agreeing to see me. Lianhua inclined her head and took her seat. Crown Princess. The title landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. Meiyin flinched, just barely. They spoke of nothing at first. The weather. The hunt. How beautiful the lake looked in autumn. Words stacked carefully, each one placed to avoid cutting too deep. Then Meiyin's voice wavered. Your Highness, she said, eyes lowering, I know this situation must be difficult for you. Lianhua watched her over the rim of her teacup. Is it? She asked. Meiyin swallowed. You and His Majesty were long rumored to be what? Lianhua interrupted gently. The pause stretched too long. Close, Meiyin finished. Lianhua set her cup down. Rumors are useful things. They tell people what they want to believe. Meiyin looked up then, searching her face. Did you love him? The question slipped out before she could stop herself. There it is, Lianhua thought. She leaned back slightly, studying the woman who now wore the crown she once had. In another life, Celia had asked the same question. Had asked it many times, in different ways, always smiling, always pretending curiosity instead of fear. Yes, Lianhua said. Once. Meiyin's breath caught. And now? She asked. Lianhua smiled faintly. Now I remember what love cost me. The koi thrashed suddenly, disturbing the water. Meiyin clasped her hands together. His Majesty says you are formidable. That you see the world too clearly for your own good. That, at least, was honest. Did he also tell you I was cruel? Lianhua asked. Meiyin hesitated. He said, you were willing to do terrible things for the sake of the throne. Lianhua nodded slowly. Then he remembers. Remembers what? Meiyin asked, too quickly. Lianhua leaned forward, her gaze sharp now. You should be careful, Crown Princess. A woman who spends her days measuring herself against ghosts will never feel secure. Meiyin stiffened. I don't understand. I think you do. Lianhua's voice softened, almost kindly. Jealousy is a slow poison. It convinces you that every shadow is a threat. In the end, you start creating the danger yourself. Meiyin's face went pale. I have no intention of interfering, Lianhua continued. But if you provoke what you don't understand, you will regret it. Silence followed, thick and uncomfortable. When Meiyin finally rose to leave, her steps were unsteady. That night, Lianhua dreamed. She dreamed of fire. Of the capital burning, towers collapsing under the weight of rebellion. Of ministers kneeling in blood-soaked robes as she passed judgment. Of Zhao Yichen standing behind her throne, his face drawn and hollow. You've gone too far, he said, again and again. She woke with her heart racing. Across the palace, Zhao Yichen sat alone in his study, staring at an untouched cup of tea. He remembered more each day now. Not everything. Not the full shape of their shared life. But enough. Enough to know that Shen Lianhua had never acted without reason. Enough to know that when she had ordered executions, it had been after sleepless nights and failed compromises. Enough to know that the empire had survived because she had been willing to become something terrible. And he had hated her for it. Meiyin fell ill 2 days later. The physicians came and went, whispering about weak pulses and sudden fevers. Zhao Yichen stood at her bedside, gripping her hand as she murmured incoherently, her face pale against the silk pillows. She met Princess Shen, Meiyin whispered once, eyes fluttering open. After that, I couldn't sleep. Something cold settled in his chest. He stormed through the palace, past startled servants, until he reached Lianhua's residence. You poisoned her, he said the moment he saw her. Lianhua didn't even look surprised. She was packing. Folded clothes lay neatly arranged on the bed. Scrolls were stacked beside her travel chest. She paused only long enough to meet his gaze. She used the same trick before, Lianhua said calmly. Fell ill whenever she felt threatened. It worked then too. His anger faltered. You remember, he said quietly. So do you. He clenched his fists. She doesn't. She's innocent in this life. Innocent people still make choices, Lianhua replied. And so do you. She closed the chest. I'm leaving the capital. His breath caught. You can't. I can, she said. And I will. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Have mercy. On her, at least. Lianhua looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned away. When she rode out of the capital at dawn, escorted by General Han Zhen, banners of Wu snapping proudly behind her, Zhao Yichen watched from the palace walls. For the first time, he felt what it was like to lose her completely. And far from the capital, beyond the reach of imperial decree, Shen Lianhua felt something she had not felt in 2 lifetimes. Relief. Su Meiyin's sickness did not fade. It bloomed. What began as a pale face and trembling hands became fainting spells, night sweats, and whispered conversations behind silk screens. The imperial physicians rotated through her chambers like anxious birds, each one more cautious than the last. No one dared say the word poison aloud, but it hovered in the air, unspoken and dangerous. Zhao Yichen did not leave her side. He slept sitting upright in a carved chair, his sword resting against the wall where he could reach it in an instant. When Meiyin whimpered in her sleep, he was there. When she cried, he held her hand. When she whispered Lianhua's name like a curse, his jaw tightened. Every memory he recovered sharpened his unease. He remembered another bed. Another woman pale with illness. Another time he had chosen comfort over clarity. The capital buzzed with rumors. Some said Princess Shen had cursed the crown princess out of spite. Others whispered that the Wu bloodline carried strange, dangerous arts. A few dared suggest that the empire itself was punishing the crown prince for breaking tradition. Lianhua heard none of it. By the time Meiyin's condition worsened, she was already half gone from the palace, her residence stripped bare of anything she did not intend to take with her. The servants moved quietly, unsettled by her calm. There was no grief here. No hesitation. Only finality. General Han Zhen arrived just before dusk. He had not changed much since her past life. Still broad-shouldered, still scarred, still looking at her as if she were the axis around which the world turned. In her last life, he had died on the northern plains, arrows bristling from his chest, buying her time to retreat. Seeing him alive again did something strange to her chest. Your Highness, he said, dropping to one knee. Your father has ordered me to escort you home. She helped him to his feet herself. You shouldn't kneel to me. I will kneel to you as many times as you command, he said evenly. She huffed a quiet laugh. You never did learn when to flatter. Before she could say more, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Zhao Yichen entered without announcing himself. The room seemed to shrink around him. He looked exhausted, shadows bruising his eyes, his hair tied carelessly instead of in the neat styles expected of the heir to the throne. So it's true, he said, taking in the packed chests. You're leaving. Lianhua nodded. At first light. You're running. She met his gaze without flinching. I'm choosing. He scoffed, but there was no heat in it. You always twist words. And you always pretend they don't matter. Silence fell between them, thick with everything they did not say. Meiyin nearly died last night, he said finally. Lianhua's expression didn't change. Did she? His voice rose. You're heartless. No, she replied softly. I'm experienced. Han Zhen shifted, hand brushing his sword hilt, but Lianhua lifted a finger and he stilled. You think I don't recognize this? She continued. In our past life, whenever you pulled away from her, she fell ill. Whenever she feared losing you, she became fragile. And every time, you came running. That's not fair, Yichen snapped. She's not the same person. Neither are you, Lianhua said. And yet here we are. His anger drained, leaving something raw behind. Then what do you want from me? The question surprised them both. Lianhua looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the boy he had been. The man he never quite became. I want nothing, she said. That's the point. He stepped closer. You could stay. You could help guide things, quietly. For the good of the realm. She laughed, sharp and bitter. You want my mind without my presence. My loyalty without my voice. You know what's coming, he insisted. The regional kings are restless. The court is fragile. You need control, she cut in. And you're afraid of anyone who might share it. The words struck home. Han Zhen cleared his throat. Your Highness, the horses. I know, Lianhua said. Yichen's shoulders slumped. Have mercy, he said again, quieter this time. On her. She doesn't remember what she did. Lianhua felt something crack then. She walked past him, stopping close enough that he could feel the warmth of her breath. I remember enough for both of us, she said. And that's why I'm leaving. She turned to Han Zhen. We go now. Dawn came cold and gray. The gates opened without ceremony. No crowd gathered. No farewell banners waved. Shen Lianhua rode out of the capital as she had once ridden into battle, head high, back straight, her banner trailing behind her like a promise. She did not look back. From the palace walls, Zhao Yichen watched until the dust settled and the road lay empty. In the Crown Princess's chambers, Su Meiyin opened her eyes. The fever was gone. She smiled faintly, alone in the quiet room, and whispered to herself, she's gone. Far from the capital, the road stretched wide before Shen Lianhua. For the first time since her rebirth, she let herself feel it fully. The past was no longer chasing her. She was finally moving toward something of her own. The land of Wu smelled different. The air was sharper, carrying the bite of pine and river water instead of incense and stone. Lianhua noticed it the moment her horse crossed the border marker. She drew in a deep breath and felt something in her chest loosen, as if her lungs had been waiting for this air all along. Her father stood at the gates of the capital, flanked by ministers and soldiers in dark blue armor. King Shenrong had aged since her last life. His hair was more silver than black now, his back not quite as straight, but his eyes were the same. Steady. Evaluating. Loving in the quiet way of men who ruled. He didn't wait for ceremony. When Lianhua dismounted, he pulled her into an embrace that smelled of ink and old leather. You've lost weight, he said gruffly. You always say that, she replied, her voice rougher than she expected. That night, they talked until the candles burned low. She told him everything. Not in riddles. Not softened. She spoke of the hunt, of Zhao Yichen's choice, of the memories that had returned like knives finding old scars. She spoke of the empire's weakness, of the court's blindness, of the way appeasement would rot the center out long before rebellion showed its face. Shenrong listened without interruption. When she finished, he poured her more wine. How long? 5 years, Lianhua said. No more. He exhaled slowly. You're certain? I've already seen it once. He studied her face. And what do you intend to do? She met his gaze. Prepare. Authority was granted before dawn. By royal decree, Princess Shen Lianhua was given full command of the Flying Cloud Cavalry, the elite force she had created in her past life. Veterans wept openly when she walked into the training grounds. Younger soldiers stared at her with awe and curiosity. She worked them hard. Too hard, some said. But discipline returned. Lines sharpened. Horses were trained to move like thought. Signals were drilled until even sleep couldn't dull their response. At the same time, she moved through the city in plain robes, listening. She listened to merchants complain of blocked roads and rising fevers in the lower wards. She listened to farmers speak of dying livestock and tainted wells. She listened to healers who had begged the court for help and been ignored. The plague came quietly. A fever that burned hot and fast. Too fast. Lianhua recognized it immediately. She closed the city gates. Ministers protested. Traders screamed. Even her father hesitated. 3 days, she said. If I'm wrong, I'll open them myself. She wasn't wrong. She ordered wells sealed and new ones dug upstream. She burned entire storehouses of contaminated grain despite the cost. She forced quarantines, ignoring cries and curses alike. People died. More would have died if she had waited. When the fever broke, the city stood. The people knelt. Not because she was their princess, but because she had saved them. Word spread. In the imperial capital, Zhao Yichen read reports by candlelight, his expression darkening with each page. Wu was fortifying its borders. Wu was drilling troops. Wu was stockpiling grain. Officially, it was all defensive. Unofficially, it was a warning. He ordered his own changes. The regional kings were invited to banquets. Titles were reaffirmed. Smiles were worn like masks. Behind closed doors, conscription lists were drawn. Watchers were placed. Messengers were followed. Lianhua watched from afar, her gaze steady. "He's still afraid," Han Zhen observed one evening as they reviewed maps. "Yes," she said. "That makes him predictable." The storm had not broken yet. But the sky was already dark. The proposal arrived wrapped in gold. It came with lacquered chests, bolts of silk dyed so deeply they seemed to drink the light, and a letter written in a confident, slanted hand that assumed its answer before the ink had even dried. The seal belonged to King Yanbo of Yen, stamped in crimson wax and pressed hard enough to crack the surface beneath it. Lianhua read the letter once. Then she read it again, slower. King Yan praised Wu's stability, her wisdom, her strength. He spoke of alliance, of shared borders and mutual protection. He spoke of marriage as if it were a bridge that could be built simply by declaring it so. He did not ask. He announced. "The audacity," Han Zhen muttered, standing beside her desk. Lianhua folded the letter carefully. "He smells blood in the water." Yen was powerful. Militarized. Its king had carved his throne out of border wars and broken treaties. An alliance through marriage would tilt the balance of the empire in a way that could not be ignored. Which was exactly the point. The court of Wu erupted. Some ministers urged acceptance, dazzled by the promise of security. Others warned of entanglement, of becoming Yan's shield in a war yet to be declared. Her father listened, silent, letting the arguments burn themselves out. That night, Han Zhen came to her privately. "I'll do it," he said. She looked up from her maps. "Do what?" "Marry you. In name only." His jaw tightened. It would block Yen without provoking the empire. The offer hung between them. In another life, she might have accepted. Trusted him. Leaned on him. Not this time. "No," she said. He frowned. "You don't even want to consider it?" "I won't build my rule on another man's shadow," she replied. "Not yours. Not anyone's." He nodded slowly. "Then what's your plan?" She smiled faintly. "Wait." 3 nights later, a traveler arrived at Wu's capital. He wore plain robes and introduced himself as a merchant from the east, his hair tied simply, his face shaded by a wide-brimmed hat. He moved carefully, like someone unused to being ignored. Lianhua knew him the moment he stepped into the hall. Zhao Yichen had lost weight. His shoulders were tighter, his eyes sharper. He looked like a man who slept poorly and trusted no one. They dismissed the guards. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I had to see you," he replied. "Yan's proposal is a threat." "To you," she corrected. He exhaled. "If Wu allies with Yan." "It won't." He stared at her. "You're certain?" "Yes." Something eased in his expression. "Why?" "Because I won't help him break the empire," she said. "Only reshape it." He flinched. They spoke until dawn, circling truths neither of them said aloud. In the end, Zhao Yichen left with a solution already forming in his mind. Weeks later, an imperial decree named a different bride for Yan's heir. The crisis passed. But Lianhua knew. The board was set. And the pieces were finally moving. The death of the old emperor was quiet. No thunder split the sky. No omens were announced by trembling astrologers. The man simply failed to wake one morning, his breath gone sometime before dawn, his hand still resting on the edge of the bed as if he'd been reaching for something he never quite touched. By sunset, Zhao Yichen was emperor. He knelt before the ancestral tablets, forehead pressed to cold stone, incense smoke curling around his bowed head. He did not cry. He did not pray. He felt only the heavy, inevitable click of a lock closing behind him. There was no turning back now. The court demanded mourning. Zhao Yichen gave them ceremony instead. The robes were worn. The rites observed. Behind the veil of ritual, orders moved swiftly. The first target was Prince Liang of Guangyang. Guangyang sat on the eastern edge of the empire, its lands poor but its position crucial. Prince Liang was young, cautious, and badly advised. In Zhao Yichen's last life, Guangyang had been the first to rebel once the central authority faltered. This time, Zhao Yichen decided not to wait. An accusation was drafted. Mismanagement of grain. withholding taxes, secretly arming militias. None of it could be proven beyond doubt, but proof had never been the point. The edict arrived at Guanyang with imperial seals still warm. Submit. Or be destroyed. Prince Liang hesitated for one night. At dawn, imperial troops crossed his borders. The empire watched. Wu watched. Lianhua stood over a map as messengers arrived in rapid succession. She read each report without comment, her expression unreadable. He's chosen fear, Hanjin said quietly. Yes, she replied. He always does. The campaign was swift and brutal. Guanyang's defenses collapsed within weeks. Prince Liang was captured and executed in the capital, his head displayed beneath the city gates as a warning. The court praised the emperor's decisiveness. The regional kings did not. Zhao Yichen summoned two of them next. King Yanbo, strong and openly ambitious. And Prince Rui of Liangzhou, whose lands controlled vital mountain passes. The summons was framed as a gesture of trust. A chance to reaffirm loyalty in person. Neither man could refuse without appearing guilty. Neither intended to walk into a trap unprepared. King Yan delayed, citing illness. Prince Rui sent excuses wrapped in flowery apologies. Zhao Yichen's patience thinned. He issued another decree. Failure to present oneself at court within 30 days would be considered treason. In Yan, banners were raised. King Yanbo laughed when the decree was read aloud. So, he said, setting his cup down. The boy has finally grown teeth. He began mobilizing his armies that same day. Prince Rui followed suit, though more reluctantly. Survival demanded it. Civil war ignited not with a single spark, but with a chain of inevitabilities snapping tight. From Wu, Lianhua watched the first battle reports arrive. Losses heavier than expected. Imperial troops inexperienced. Commanders promoted too quickly, loyalty valued over competence. He learned nothing, she murmured. Hanjin glanced at her. Do we intervene? Not yet. She looked south, where the old tribal alliances waited, watching. Listening. Zhao Yichen stood in the war council chamber as maps were redrawn again and again, each one uglier than the last. Yan's troops were disciplined, brutal, experienced. They broke imperial lines like waves against sand. He began to understand. Too late. The first cut had been made. And it was deeper than he'd intended. The empire did not fall all at once. It sagged first. Cities went quiet before they burned. Messengers stopped arriving on time. Taxes came in lighter than promised, then not at all. Zhao Yichen read casualty lists until the names blurred together, until death became numbers, and numbers became noise. Yan's armies moved like something alive. They didn't rush the capital. They didn't need to. They took the outer cities first, one by one, cutting supply lines, breaking morale, forcing surrender without wasting arrows. Yan soldiers had seen war before. Imperial troops had seen drills and speeches. The difference showed in the blood. Zhao Yichen stood at the palace balcony one night, staring at the dark horizon. Fires glowed faintly in the distance, too far to smell, close enough to see. He thought of Lianhua. The thought came unbidden, sharp as a blade slipping between ribs. She would have anticipated this. She would have cut deeper, faster, before Yan could settle into rhythm. She would have sacrificed something early to save everything later. He had never forgiven her for that kind of thinking. Now it haunted him. Su Meiyin rarely left her chambers anymore. She had grown thin, her cheeks hollow, her voice soft and tired. The court still called her gentle, still praised her kindness, but kindness did nothing for a city preparing to starve. You should rest, Zhao Yichen told her one evening, though he had not rested himself in weeks. She smiled faintly. You should come with me. I can't. You never can, she said, not accusing. Just sad. That night, she fled. No announcement. No farewell. She left dressed as a servant, hair hidden beneath a plain scarf, slipping through a side gate while the city slept. She took only a small chest of jewels and the certainty that staying meant dying. She did not make it far. Yan scouts caught her 2 days later. By the third city she betrayed, Su Meiyin was crying. They'll kill me if I don't help, she sobbed, clutching her captor's sleeve. Please. I know things. Weak points. Hidden roads. Supply routes. The general listened. The gates fell faster after that. Inside the capital, panic bloomed. Grain prices soared. Refugees crowded the streets. Ministers argued until voices broke, then began packing their own escapes. Zhao Yichen issued orders no one followed and promises no one believed. When the final defenses collapsed, he didn't wait for capture. He fled north to the old traveling palace, a relic of past emperors, half forgotten and poorly supplied. The retreat was desperate, ugly. Soldiers deserted along the road. Horses dropped from exhaustion. The palace was surrounded within weeks. Yan's banners dotted the hills like a spreading infection. Inside, Zhao Yichen rationed water and listened to the wind howl through cracked stone halls. He dreamed of fire and woke tasting ash. At last, he wrote the letter. To Wu. His hand shook as he sealed it. In Wu, Shen Lianhua read the message without expression. He's running out of time, Hanjin said. Yes, she replied. And now he knows it. She waited. 3 days. 5. 7. Yan's forces stretched thin, confident in their victory. Supplies dwindled. Discipline frayed. Then Lianhua moved. Wu's banners rose alongside those of the southwestern tribes, warriors painted and fierce, answering old promises. The march was swift, merciless. She struck Yan's flanks at dawn, cutting through exhausted troops like silk under shears. The siege broke. Yan's last stronghold fell screaming. At the traveling palace, Zhao Yichen emerged to meet her, thinner, dirt-streaked, eyes burning with desperate relief. You came, he said hoarsely. I did, Lianhua replied. He stepped closer. Only you understand. Only you can save this. She looked at him then, really looked. And felt nothing at all. The battlefield after victory was never quiet. Lianhua rode through the wreckage at dawn, her horse stepping carefully around broken spears and discarded shields. Smoke clung low to the ground, smelling of damp ash and iron. The cries of the wounded had softened into exhausted murmurs, the sound of men who no longer expected mercy or cruelty, only an end. Yan's last stronghold loomed ahead, its walls scarred and blackened. The siege had not been long, but it had been decisive. Lianhua had cut supply routes first, then struck at the commanders, letting panic do the rest. It was the same strategy she had used once before, only cleaner. Sharper. She dismounted before the gates. Inside, King Yanbo waited. He was larger than she remembered, broader in the shoulders, his beard streaked with gray. He wore his armor like a second skin, dented and stained, but his posture was still proud. He smiled when she entered, as if greeting an equal instead of an enemy. So, he said, spreading his hands. The woman who broke the siege. Lianhua did not return the smile. The war is over. For him, Yanbo said. Not for us. He circled her slowly. You could have let him die. Let the empire rot. Why come now? She met his gaze. Timing. He laughed. Ambition, then. Yes, she said simply. The word seemed to please him. You know what they'll call you, he said. Usurper. Traitor. Worse. I've been called worse, she replied. He leaned closer. Rule with me. Wu and Yan together. We could divide the realm and make history forget the boy in the palace. For a moment, she considered it. Not because she wanted him. But because she wanted to measure the temptation. No, she said. I don't share power. Yanbo studied her, then nodded. Then do what you came to do. She left him alive. For now. Outside the stronghold, Wu's banner snapped in the wind. The southwestern tribes knelt to her openly, their leaders pressing foreheads to the ground. Hanjin watched her with something like awe. You could take the capital, he said quietly. Now. I will, she replied. But not as a rescuer. At the traveling palace, Zhao Yichen waited. He stood in the courtyard when she arrived, thinner still, his robes hanging loose, his eyes too bright. He looked at her as if she were the last solid thing left in a world that had turned to smoke. You've always been like this, he said softly. Arriving when everything is already burning. She dismounted. I didn't come to save you, she said. His mouth curved into something almost like a smile. You never could lie to me. He stepped closer. Let me make this right. Be my empress. Rule with me. Together. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, Lianhua felt no pull at all. She drew her spear. History needs a cleaner ending, she said. He looked down at the blade as it pierced his chest, surprise flickering once before fading. I understand now, he whispered. She withdrew the spear. He fell. Behind her, the empire waited to be taken. Zhao Yichen did not die immediately. He lay on the cold stone of the traveling palace courtyard, breath coming in shallow, uneven pulls, blood spreading beneath him in a dark, patient stain. The spear had gone cleanly through. Lianhua had never been careless with her strikes. She stood over him, the weapon still warm in her hands. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind moved through the broken courtyard, stirring fallen leaves, tugging at the torn banners that still bore the imperial dragon. Somewhere beyond the walls, Wu soldiers waited. Yan's forces were scattered and leaderless. The empire had reached the edge of a breath it didn't yet know how to release. Yichen coughed, a wet, broken sound. Blood flecked his lips. So this, he murmured, staring up at the sky, is how it ends. Lianhua didn't answer right away. She watched his face as if committing it to memory, not out of love, but out of habit. He looked smaller like this. Stripped of armor, of command, of the illusion that he had ever truly been in control. In our last life, he continued faintly, I thought I was afraid of you. She knelt beside him, lowering herself so they were eye level. Her expression was calm, almost gentle. You weren't afraid of me, she said. You were afraid of what ruling demanded. I just refused to look away from it. His eyes flickered. I see that now. Silence stretched. He reached for her hand, missed, and let his arm fall back uselessly. I used to tell myself, he said, voice thinning, that if I had chosen differently, everything would have been simpler. Kinder. She shook her head slowly. No. It would have just taken longer to break. A shudder ran through him. Will you at least spare her name? She knew who he meant. History won't need her, Lianhua said. It will barely remember you. That hurt more than the wound. His breath stuttered, then steadied, then slowed. In another life, he whispered, maybe I could have followed you. She leaned closer, close enough that only he could hear her. In another life, she said softly, I wouldn't have waited for you. His eyes closed. When she stood, Zhao Yichen was already gone. Han Zhen arrived moments later, his boots echoing against the stone. He took in the scene with one glance, then went to one knee without hesitation. It's done, he said. Yes, Lianhua replied. Now we decide how it's remembered. The story spread fast. By the time the capital heard of Zhao Yichen's death, it had already been shaped. The emperor, cornered and betrayed, had fallen to wounds inflicted by the rebel King Yanbo. Princess Shen Lianhua, arriving too late to save him, had avenged the throne and broken Yan's remaining forces. King Yanbo was executed publicly 3 days later. He met death with a crooked smile and a nod in Lianhua's direction, as if acknowledging a game well played. His head was displayed at the southern gate. The rebellion ended not with cheers, but with exhaustion. The court gathered what was left of itself. Ministers argued behind closed doors, voices brittle with fear. There was no emperor. No heir worth backing. The empire needed a hand strong enough to keep it from tearing itself apart, and everyone knew whose hand that was. They came to Wu. Lianhua did not go to the capital at once. She waited, watching the river swell with spring melt, listening to reports, measuring loyalty not by words but by timing. When she finally rode out, she did so not as a savior, but as a ruler. The old imperial banners were lowered. Wu's rose in their place. And for the first time since her rebirth, Shen Lianhua felt no echo of regret chasing her steps. Only the steady certainty of a path chosen, and never again surrendered. The coronation did not come with thunder. There were no miracles in the sky, no beasts bowing in the streets, no prophecies read aloud to justify what everyone already understood. The empire had been hollowed out by fear and war. What it needed was not spectacle, but steadiness. Shen Lianhua stood alone in the Hall of Ancestral Winds at dawn, dressed in black and deep blue. Not imperial gold. Not yet. The stone beneath her feet was cold, worn smooth by centuries of rulers who had believed themselves permanent. She touched the altar once. Not to pray. To acknowledge. When she stepped out onto the terrace, the court was already assembled. Ministers knelt in uneven lines, some too quickly, others after a heartbeat's hesitation. Soldiers stood at attention, armor dulled by travel and use. Beyond them, the city waited in uneasy silence. Her father, King Shenrong, stood to her right. He wore plain robes, no crown. His hair was fully white now, but his gaze was clear. When she looked at him, something in her chest tightened. "You don't owe me this," he said quietly. "I know," she replied. "That's why I want to give it." The proclamation was read. The old dynasty was declared ended, not with condemnation, but with finality. A new era named. A new state recognized. Wu. Not as a regional power. As the heart of the realm. When the crown was brought forward, Lianhua did not bow her head. She lifted it herself and placed it where it belonged. The court exhaled as one. Later, when the ceremonies were done and the palace had grown quiet, she walked the unfinished halls of the new capital. Builder's marks still stained the stone. The air smelled of fresh wood and lime. This place had not yet learned her shape. She liked that. From the highest balcony, she looked out over the city. The river cut a clean line through it, catching the afternoon light. Beyond the walls, fields waited to be planted again. Hanjin approached without armor, his step soft. "My life is yours," he said simply. She turned to him. Really turned this time. "No," she said. "Your life is your own. I want your service, not your sacrifice." Something eased in his expression. He knelt anyway. "Then I give you my loyalty," he said. Freely. She accepted it with a nod. As evening fell, lanterns bloomed across the city. Not in celebration. In reassurance. People needed to see light again. Needed to believe tomorrow would come. Lianhua watched them flicker on one by one. In her past life, she had stood beside a throne that was never fully hers, shaping a future that rejected her the moment it demanded kindness over truth. She had loved, and been punished for it. Now, there was no one beside her. And she had never felt less alone. The wind lifted her hair, cool and steady. Below, the empire breathed, wounded but alive. Shen Lianhua closed her eyes. This time, the future did not feel like a burden. It felt like something she had finally claimed.